5 of us just got back from a week of wonderful time in California. We attended the 22nd annual Western Buddhist Monastic Gathering, and this was at the Land of Medicine Buddha in Soquel, California. And it's in a very beautiful area of California with huge redwood trees. So we got to take some walks every day, and quite beautiful. The theme for this annual gathering was sustaining Western monasticism. And I thought to give a few highlights of the talks, the presentations that I found very helpful and inspiring, actually. There were about 40 monastics there from all different traditions, Zen, Chan, Theravadan, Tibetan. And the first presentation was given by Venerable Chudran, and she really hit upon sustaining the Dharma in the West, and she said a few things that were very helpful and really cut to the core of sustaining the Dharma in the West. The first thing she said was, and she said this before, is that the Sangha is the moral conscience of society. And then she said the responsibility for Buddhism to survive and flourish in the West is up to the Western Sangha. So that's all of us in the room here. She also talked a little bit about our economy of dana here, that we don't buy our own food. It is offered to us by lay people. And she said if monastics practice well, people will support the Sangha. And, we are living proof of that, certainly. She also talked about sustaining the Dharma by studying, meditating, and serving society. She said Dharma practice relates to life, just as the Buddha demonstrated in his life. He wasn't separate and cut off. He was interacting and teaching all the time and responding to the circumstances that were going on at that time. She also said that the ultimate purpose of each precept is to sustain the Dharma forever. The ultimate purpose of each precept is to sustain the Dharma forever. So that's a big sentence. Yeah. And she said it's very important to give proper ordination then. And she also really encouraged that we learn about all traditions in Buddhism, that's very helpful and really helps to open our mind. And I can remember the first time I went to one of these gatherings, it was soon after I ordained, and I remember that my thought about it was, gosh, we are all so different, which was interesting, yeah? And then this year, my takeaway was, oh my, we are so the same. So, the outward, appearance is a little different, but not what we're trying to do with our minds and hearts. So that was interesting. She also talked about how it's helpful to get involved in interfaith activities to connect us with other spiritual traditions. And then she talked about if we don't carry on the teachings of the Buddha in a pure way, it will cease to be a path of liberation, which also is a huge sentence, And so she said it's really important for us to find our voice if we're, in a group or whatever, and somebody is saying that they don't believe that the Buddha taught rebirth, for example, that we need to speak our truth and talk about, where that is in the scriptures, and to, keep the teachings pure in that way. And So her presentation at the beginning really helped to set the stage, I think, for really a very peaceful and kind of gentle gathering this year. It was quite lovely. Another presentation was by a monk, Venerable Heimen. He's of the Korean tradition. And he presented his doctoral dissertation proposal, which also weaves into sustaining the Dharma. And he wants to develop a teaching program for monastics, all kinds of monastics, not just one tradition, that teaches knowledge, ethics, and compassion. And I guess there's some examples of this kind of teaching style in, I think, maybe some of the Asian countries. And so everybody kind of comes and they share resources and get kind of all the general ideas about, Buddhism and ethics and, and compassion. And then you go off into your specific traditions and, get specific information. And as a way to, a lot of different benefits of that, then we learn about other traditions and have connection to other people that are practicing other traditions and sharing resources, so it's, easier then and not so expensive, etc. And so he's just kind of fleshing this out, but that's kind of what he wants to start looking at for his dissertation, which was also quite interesting. Then there was a presentation by Venerable Droma, who is an artist, and she talked about the role of creativity and education in sustaining the Dharma. And she just gave such a beautiful presentation. Her teacher asked her to make a sculpture in, I don't know, was it in brass? I can't remember. Was it brass? Yeah. And it was a life size of a horse, and then one of the kings in Tibet that was so supportive of the Dharma. And she did this, and then that, let's see, what was that place? Was it a library? It was a library in some part of no. India? Yes, North India, that's right. Yeah, yes, they cast it in Varanasi, and then His Holiness came and dedicated, and so she was involved in that process. And like most projects that you do in India, she had such an interesting experience. Trying to move the thing. They couldn't get a crane in because the streets were too narrow, and so they cut logs and moved it like they moved the pyramids in Egypt, things like this. And she said usually something like this would probably take 3-4 years maybe. She did it in a year. But she said how, it was such a wonderful experience for her and opened her heart so much. And she talked a little bit about her background in terms of, started out as an artist and started seeing especially Tibetan art, and how that opened her up to the Dharma, so that's another gateway in. And then she talked about to use creativity when the mind gets kind of dry when you're practicing, and you need to nourish it with something. Say again? Oh, yeah, and she talked about how the different ways that you learn, some visually, some auditorial, and some kinesthetic, yeah. And so art really can capture that, and so that you can really enhance your practice with that. And so she encouraged everybody to think about how they could bring the creative process into different communities as a way to kind of nourish ourselves, which was also quite lovely, I thought. And she talked about how that really enhances balance then, so that we don't get so, maybe tight, or, that the material just starts getting dry for ourselves. And then Venerable Steve talked one day also, and he talked about respect a bit. And he talked about how respect is dependent on our ordination, and the respect isn't directed to us as people, and how important that is to keep that clear in the mind. And since we take the precepts, then we're creating merit continuously, and really the respect comes due to our vows or precepts that we hold. And he said, which was interesting, how he said, if we weren't wearing robes, we wouldn't be objects of respect. And so that's kind of a nice way to keep clear about it, because it's easy to kind of personalize it if you're getting respect, if people are making offerings or whatever, and it's easy to get into the 8 worldly concerns with that, in terms of reputation or praise. And so he just talked about the importance of remembering what is being respected. And so, and Venerable Children has also taught us that a lot, that when people are making offerings, it's to the robes, it's to the ordination, it's to, the vows, and to think of it that way. Let's see, what else? There was a lot of time for walks, and again, as I said, it was so beautiful there. And then in the evening, there was a geshe there from Sarah, I think, yeah. And he was teaching on paths and grounds, and so whoever wanted to go could go to that in the evening. And he was a very dynamic teacher, geshe Sangye, and young, Tibetan, so Venerable Steve translated, but taught as fast as Venerable Children. They were really quick, and was really joyful and, energetic in it. It was quite nice. They also had some movies that we watched that were mostly from Chinese tradition, and I think somebody got a grant and then made some, short, kind of short movies about vows and about, what's the other one? Alms, yeah. And it just talked about how when Buddhism went to China, how it changed, and they worked in the fields, and instead of going on alms rounds. And so that was quite nice too. We broke out in groups sometimes. Sometimes we broke out just in dyads, especially at first, so that we could get to know one another in a more, close, intimate way. So it was quite nice. So it was just a good example of seeing, 40 monastics spending the week together, all in harmony and respecting one another and sharing and learning from each other. So it was a quite lovely experience.